For, over a century, the way we figured out how materials work, how they bend, stretch, and ultimately break, was a slow, careful process. It was all based on theory and a handful of tests. But that's all changing. Right now, we're in the middle of a massive paradigm shift, a revolution that's completely driven by data. And in this explainer, we're going to dive into the absolutely pioneering work of Professor Laura DeLaurentis and her group, who are right on the bleeding edge of this new world. Okay, so this quote, this really nails it. This is from a huge review paper the group just put out, and it sets the stage perfectly. What does it actually mean, though? Well, think about it this way. The old way to test a material was to, say, pull on a metal bar and measure one number for the force and one number for how much it stretched. And that's what they mean by the limited data regime. But now, with new tools, we can get a high-def movie of the entire surface of the material as it deforms. We're talking millions of data points. We've literally gone from a single pixel of information to a full-blown feature film. And this explosion of data, it's a huge opportunity, but it also brings up a massive question. What on earth do we do with all of it? So here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll get a handle on this new paradigm and map out the big challenges everyone in the field is facing. Then, we're going to visit 4 incredible landmarks from Professor DeLaurentis' research. Each one tackles a major challenge and shows a clear evolution in how her group is solving tougher and tougher problems. All right, first up, a new materials paradigm. Let's really dig into this fundamental shift, this move away from a world of pure theory into a world driven by pure data. This really lays it all out, doesn't it? The old way versus the new way. The classical approach is probably what you remember from school. A brilliant scientist as a simple test has a flash of insight about the math, and then spends ages tweaking a few numbers to make it fit. The new paradigm? It just flips the script. It says, forget that. Let's do a super complex experiment, get a ton of data, and then let a machine learning model figure out the underlying physics for us. It's a huge leap from relying on human intuition to embracing automated discovery. Okay, so let's see how this new way of thinking creates a whole new research landscape. We're going to use the group's big 2024 review paper as our map to navigate all the different approaches and, the big hurdles. So inside this data-driven world, there are basically 2 big camps, 2 different philosophies. On one side, you've got what are called model-free approaches. Imagine having a massive, infinitely detailed phone book of every experiment ever. When you need an answer, you just look up the closest match. It's straightforward, but man, is it data hungry. And it has no idea what to do if you ask it something it hasn't seen before. The other camp is model-based approaches, and this is where Professor DeLaurentis' work shines. The goal here isn't just to look up the answer, it's to learn the rules, to find that general mathematical formula that you can reuse anywhere. You're not just using the phone book, you're learning how to generate any phone number you could ever need. But trying to build these models from data throws up 3 huge challenges, really the elephants in the room. First, physical consistency. Can your model just invent energy out of thin air? Because if it can, it's useless. Second, interpretability. Is the model just a black box? Can we actually understand what the heck it's doing inside? And third, data hunger. Just how much expensive experimental data do you have to feed these things to get something reliable? Now, what's so cool is that the rest of our journey is all about how this group came up with brilliant answers to each of these questions. So, our first landmark. This one goes straight for that second challenge, the black box problem. How do you build a machine learning model that a human can actually look at and understand? I mean, just pause on this question for a second. It's incredibly ambitious. We're not just asking a computer to connect the dots on a graph. We are asking it to have that spark of scientific discovery, to find the simple, elegant, beautiful piece of math that explains the whole system. And their answer is a framework they call Euclid. Now, the magic here is that it's built for the real world. That word unsupervised is so important. It means it works with the kind of messy data you can actually get from an experiment, like how things move, without needing data on the stresses, which is basically impossible to measure everywhere. And it does it all from a single experiment to find a clean, understandable formula. It's literally automated science. So how does it pull this off? It's kind of like this. First, you give the computer a giant toolbox full of every possible mathematical function you can think of. Sines, cosines, polynomials, the whole shebang. Then you give it the rulebook, the laws of physics. You tell it, hey, by the way, all the forces have to balance out. Finally comes the magic step. You use a clever technique called sparse regression, which is basically telling the AI to find the laziest, simplest possible answer. It forces it to pick the absolute minimum number of tools from the toolbox that can explain all the data, while still following all the rules. And the results
are just stunning. In one of their papers, they put Euclid to the test. They took a known, really complicated equation for how metals deform and used it to generate some perfect virtual experimental data. Then, they fed only the deformation data into Euclid, and look at this. It discovered the exact equation they started with. It didn't get close. It rediscovered a fundamental law of physics completely from scratch. So Euclid cracks the code on interpretability. Fantastic. Now for landmark number 2, let's go after that first and maybe most important challenge on our list, making sure these models actually obey the laws of physics. And this is a total deal breaker for any real engineering. A standard neural network is just a really, really flexible curve fitter. It has no built-in knowledge of the universe. So if your data is a little noisy, it has absolutely no problem learning a model that violates the second law of thermodynamics, one that literally creates energy from nothing. You simply cannot build a bridge or a jet engine with a model like that. Full stop. So how in the world do you teach a neural network about thermodynamics? Well, the insight here is incredibly elegant. You don't try to teach it. You build the rules right into its DNA. It turns out that for a huge class of materials, all of their complex behaviors can be boiled down to just 2 core energy equations. And thermodynamics demands that these equations must have a special mathematical property. They have to be convex. So the logic follows pretty simply then, right? If you can force your neural network to only produce convex energy potentials, then you automatically guarantee the whole model is thermodynamically consistent. And that is precisely what the GSMN framework does. It uses a very special kind of network architecture, and the bottom line is that, by its very design, it is mathematically incapable of breaking the rules. The physics is literally hard-coded into its structure. Okay, so now we've got tools that are interpretable and physically sound. So let's see what happens when the group unleashes them on one of the toughest, most notorious problems in all of mechanics, predicting fracture. And what's just wild is how fast things are moving here. You can see the evolution right on this timeline. In 2024, the group was using one set of powerful tools. But just 1 year later, they made this massive leap to a totally new architecture called deep operator networks. So let's unpack what that leap actually means. Think of that first approach, the 2024 stuff, as being like a highly specialized craftsman. You can give it one very specific task, say, figure out the fracture pattern for a plate with a 10mm crack, and it will work and eventually give you a beautiful custom answer for that one single case. But if you change the question just a tiny bit, okay, now what about an 11mm crack? You have to start the whole expensive process all over again from scratch. DeepONets are a complete game changer. This approach doesn't just learn one answer, it learns the underlying theory. You train it on a whole family of problems, like cracks from 5 to 15 millimeters, and it learns the general relationship between the input and the output. So once it's trained, you can ask it about a 10mm crack, an 11mm crack, or even a 12.3mm crack it's never seen before, and it gives you the answer, boom, instantly. It is a massive upgrade in power and efficiency. Okay, for our final section, we're going to bring this whole thing full circle. We've talked so much about the models, but what about the data that we're feeding them? This brings us right back to that third big challenge we talked about, data hunger. We all know the saying, right? Garbage in, garbage out. And it has never been more true than it is here. We can build the most sophisticated, physically consistent AI model in the world, but if we feed it bad data, we're going to get bad results. So this raises a really fascinating question. Are we even performing the best experiments to begin with? Is just pulling on a simple rectangle really the most informative thing we can do? And this is where the research gets really meta, and frankly, just so cool. They take a powerful algorithm that's usually used to design things like lightweight airplane parts, and they completely flip the script. They ask the AI, don't design the strongest shape. Instead, design the most interesting shape. Design a test sample that, when we test it, will generate the richest, most information-packed data possible. The AI is literally designing the perfect experiment for its future AI self to analyze. It's incredible. And that leaves us with this final, fascinating thought to chew on. What happens when this loop closes? When an AI not only learns the laws of physics from our data, but also tells us exactly which experiments we need to run to discover them even faster. We're seeing the start of a powerful, self-reinforcing cycle of automated scientific discovery. It's a glimpse into a future where understanding our physical world is a deep collaboration between human curiosity and artificial intelligence. Thanks for joining us on The Explainer.